Tupac Shakur documentary. 11:15 p.m. Las Vegas. September 7, 1996. A BMW sits at a red light on Flamingo Road. Inside is a 25-year-old man who has already survived a shooting once. He has released the first double album in the history of rap music. He has been convicted, imprisoned, and freed on a bond that made headlines on its own. He has recorded an album under a new name, obsessed with the idea that he wouldn't live to see it released. He won't. A white Cadillac pulls alongside. For shots. 6 days later, he is gone. Almost 30 years later, in the summer of 2026, a man sits in a Nevada courtroom accused of ordering that murder. This is not a cold case anymore. This is the story of how a boy born into a revolution became one of the most influential artists in American history, and why the fight over his death is only now reaching its conclusion. Before he had a name that the world would know, he was a legal case. In April 1971, a woman named Afeni Shakur stood trial in New York as one of the lead defendants in what became known as the Panther 21 case. 21 members of the Black Panther Party accused of plotting coordinated bombings across the city. Afeni represented herself. She was pregnant the entire time. The jury acquitted every defendant on every count. It took less than an hour of deliberation. 1 month later, on June 16, 1971, in East Harlem, Afeni gave birth to a son. She named him Lesane Parish Crooks. Within a year, she renamed him Tupac Amaru, after the 18th century Incan revolutionary who was executed by Spanish colonial forces for leading an indigenous uprising. The name itself was a statement of intent. There was no version of this childhood that existed outside of politics. His mother had spent his time in the womb fighting for her freedom against a government that considered her family an active threat. He was raised around Panther veterans, community organizers, people who had done time, people who had buried friends. The FBI's counterintelligence program had spent years trying to dismantle the Black Panther Party from the inside, and even after Afeni's acquittal, the family carried the weight of that surveillance and the poverty that came with a movement that had been systematically starved of resources. By the early 1980s, the pressures of raising a family in New York City had become unsustainable. In 1984, Afeni moved Tupac and his sister to Baltimore, Maryland, hoping for something steadier. What happened next is the part of the story people forget. At the Baltimore School for the Arts, Tupac Shakur studied Shakespeare. He studied classical ballet. He performed in plays. Classmates and teachers who knew him during this period describe a serious, disciplined student, someone who read constantly, who could quote poetry from memory, who had an unusual gift for language even as a young teenager. This is the contradiction that would define his entire public life. A classically trained artist who was also coming of age in neighborhoods shaped by violence and economic abandonment. He wasn't choosing between two identities. He was living both of them at once, and it nearly tore him apart before his career had even started. He found an early outlet at local rap competitions, including one held at the Enoch Pratt Free Library, where, even as a teenager, his lyrics carried a message aimed squarely at his peers. Put the streets down, pick a book up. It's a detail worth sitting with, because it complicates the image that record labels would later sell. The same young man later marketed as an outlaw was, at 15 and 16, standing in a public library trying to talk other kids out of the life he would eventually be pulled back into. In 1988, the family moved again, this time to Marin City, California, just north of San Francisco. The environment was rougher, and the sense of stability Baltimore had offered evaporated. It was here that the artistic foundation and the street reality he'd been straddling his whole life started to fuse into the persona the world would eventually meet. Tupac's entry into the professional music industry didn't come through a record deal or a demo tape landing on the right desk. It came through Digital Underground, the Bay Area hip-hop group best known for the party anthem, the Humpty Dance. Tupac joined as a roadie and backup dancer, not the star, not even a credited rapper at first. He was learning the business from the ground floor, how tours were run, how records were made, how an image was constructed and sold. That apprenticeship paid off fast. In 1991, at just 20 years old, he released his debut solo album, Tupacalypse Now. It was not a party record. Tupacalypse Now confronted police brutality, poverty, and the day-to-day reality of young black men in America with a directness that unsettled people far outside hip-hop's usual audience. The album became a flashpoint. Then, Vice President Dan Quayle publicly condemned it, tying it to the shooting of a Texas state trooper, despite the fact that the officer involved said he had never listened to the album. The controversy only amplified Tupac's reach. He crossed into film almost immediately, delivering a breakout performance in Juice in 1992 as Bishop, a role that unsettled audiences with how convincingly he embodied a young man's descent into violence, and later starring opposite Janet Jackson in Poetic Justice. By his early 20s, Tupac Shakur wasn't just a rapper. He was a cultural lightning rod, an artist, an actor, and increasingly, a target. Legal trouble followed him constantly through this period. Arrests, altercations, civil suits. Some of it was self-inflicted. Some of it reflected the intense scrutiny a young black man with his level of visibility and political inheritance was always going to face. By the mid-1990s, that scrutiny would collide with something far more dangerous. November 30th, 1994. Quad Recording Studios, Times Square, New York City. Tupac arrives to record a guest verse. In the lobby, he's ambushed and shot 5 times. He survives. But the shooting does something that no legal case or media controversy had managed to do before. It convinces Tupac that the industry itself had turned on him. He believed, publicly and repeatedly, that people close to the situation had prior knowledge of the attack and let it happen. That suspicion, whether fully accurate or not, became the emotional engine behind everything he recorded from that point forward. What followed was the most consequential and most destructive rivalry in the history of American popular music, the East Coast versus West Coast feud, with Tupac and Christopher Wallace, known as the Notorious B.I.G., positioned as its 2 central figures. The two had once been friends. Now they were opposing symbols in a conflict that stretched far beyond either of them, entangling record labels, business rivalries, and street politics that neither artist could fully control. In 1995, while this tension was escalating, Tupac was convicted of sexual abuse in a case dating back to 1993 and sentenced to prison. What happened next remains one of the strangest achievements in music history. While he was incarcerated, his album Me Against the World debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts. No artist had ever topped the charts while sitting in prison. It was proof, even in the depths of his legal troubles, that his connection with his audience hadn't just survived, it had deepened. In October 1995, Tupac walked out of prison on a $1.4 million bond, paid by Marion Suge Knight, the co-founder and CEO of Death Row Records. It was less a favor than a business transaction. In exchange, Tupac signed with Death Row and, according to numerous accounts, agreed to deliver several albums under the label. The partnership would define, and ultimately doom, the final year of his life. Within months, Death Row released All Eyes on Me, the first double-disc solo album in rap history. It was a statement of dominance, both artistically and commercially, and it cemented Tupac as arguably the biggest star in hip-hop. But behind the scenes, the pressure was accelerating. The feud with Bad Boy Records and Biggie Smalls was no longer just lyrical. It had become genuinely dangerous, tracking a path toward violence that neither side seemed able or willing to stop. By 1996, Tupac had adopted a new identity for his art, Machiavelli, a name borrowed from the Renaissance political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli, whose writings on the strategic use of deception fascinated him. Under that name, he recorded the Don Killuminati, the 7-day theory in a reported 7-day sprint, a burst of creative intensity shadowed by an unmistakable, almost prophetic obsession with his own death. Listen to the album now, and it's hard not to hear a man who believed, on some level, that he was recording his own epitaph. September 7th, 1996. Las Vegas. Tupac and his entourage attend a heavyweight fight at the MGM Grand, Mike Tyson against Bruce Seldon. Also in the building that night, Orlando Anderson, a young man affiliated with the Southside Compton Crips. Inside the MGM Grand lobby, a physical altercation breaks out between Tupac's group and Anderson. Security footage from the hotel would later show the confrontation, Tupac and members of his entourage assaulting Anderson in what lasted only seconds but would carry consequences for decades. Hours later, at 11:15 p.m., Tupac is riding in a BMW driven by Suge Knight, traveling down Flamingo Road. A white Cadillac pulls up alongside. Gunfire erupts. Tupac is struck 4 times. He is rushed to University Medical Center. For 6 days, he fights for his life. On September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur dies. He is 25 years old. The investigation that followed became, almost immediately, one of the most scrutinized unsolved cases in American criminal history. Suspicion fell quickly on Orlando Anderson, given the fight hours earlier and his gang affiliation, but no charges were filed. Anderson himself was killed in 1998 in an unrelated shooting in Compton, taking whatever he knew to the grave, or so it seemed for the next 25 years. For a generation of hip-hop fans, the case became something closer to folklore than an open investigation. Documentaries, books, and conspiracy theories filled the vacuum left by a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department that appeared, for decades, unable or unwilling to close the file. The break in the case didn't come from new forensic evidence. It came from a book. Dwayne Davis, known on the street as Kef D, was Orlando Anderson's uncle and a self-described shot caller for the Southside Compton Crips. In 2019, he published a memoir titled Compton Street Legend, in which he described, in detail, his own role in the events of that night, including his claim that he was in the front passenger seat of the white Cadillac when the shots were fired. He repeated versions of this account in interviews with police and media outlets for years afterward, protected, he believed, by a proffer agreement that shielded him from prosecution for what he told investigators. In September 2023, Las Vegas prosecutors decided his own words were enough. Dwayne Davis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the killing of Tupac Shakur. It was the first arrest in the case in nearly 3 decades. Davis pleaded not guilty. His legal team has since argued 2 things simultaneously. First, that his proffer agreements with law enforcement should have shielded his statements from prosecution, an argument the presiding judge, Carly Kearney, rejected, finding no evidence of a binding immunity deal. Second, and somewhat contradictorily, that his own detailed confessions were exaggerations, invented to sell books and secure paid interviews rather than a truthful account of the crime. As of the summer of 2026, Dwayne Davis remains in custody at High Desert State Prison, held without bail. His trial, delayed multiple times as his defense team works through what his own attorney has called a voluminous amount of evidence, is now scheduled to begin on August 10, 2026, nearly 30 years, almost to the month, after Tupac's death. If convicted, Davis faces life in prison. The case has also pulled in an unexpected and much more contemporary name. Davis has alleged, at various points, that music mogul Sean Diddy Combs offered money to have Tupac killed. Allegations that surfaced publicly around the same period Combs was facing his own separate federal criminal case and is now serving a sentence under the Mann Act. Whether any of that becomes relevant testimony at trial remains one of the case's open questions heading into August. The criminal trial isn't the only legal front. In the spring of 2026, Tupac's stepbrother, Maurice "Ma-Preme" Shakur, acting as administrator of his late father Mutual Shakur's estate, filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit in Los Angeles County Superior Court. The suit names Dwayne Davis directly, and nearly 100 unnamed co-conspirators, listed as John Doe's, whose identities the family's legal team hopes discovery will eventually reveal. The lawsuit leans on what's known as the discovery rule, a legal doctrine that allows a plaintiff to file outside the normal statute of limitations if they can show the full scope of a wrong wasn't knowable until much later. The family's argument is that grand jury transcripts made public through Davis's prosecution, along with revelations from recent documentary investigations, exposed a conspiracy far wider than a single drive-by retaliation, and that the clock on their right to sue only started ticking once that fuller picture came into view. Whatever the outcome, the message from the family is consistent. They don't believe Dwayne Davis acted alone, and they don't believe the criminal justice system, on its own, will hold everyone accountable. The civil case is their attempt to widen the net. Tupac Shakur's career, in strict calendar terms, lasted about 5 years. His influence has now outlasted that career by a factor of 6. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017. Posthumous albums, pieced together from vault recordings, have continued to chart in the decades since his death, an almost unprecedented afterlife for a recording artist. His poetry, published after his death in the collection The Rose That Grew from Concrete, is taught in classrooms. His interviews are dissected in film studies courses. Directors, poets, and politicians have all cited him as a reference point for understanding a very specific American moment: the collision of hip-hop, mass incarceration, police violence, and black political consciousness in the 1990s. And now, in 2026, his story has come full circle in a way that even Tupac himself, with his fixation on prophecy and mortality, might have found fitting. He was born because a courtroom acquitted his mother. 30 years after his death, his family is back in a courtroom, trying to force the justice system to finally answer for how he died. The trial, beginning August 10, 2026, won't undo anything. It won't give back the albums he never got to make, the roles he never got to play, or the decades he never got to live. What it might do, for the first time since a white Cadillac pulled alongside a BMW on Flamingo Road, is give a name and a verdict to a killing that has haunted American music for a generation. From a Black Panther courtroom in 1971 to a murder trial in 2026, the throughline of Tupac Shakur's life has never really been about music alone. It's been an unresolved argument about power, race, and who America decides is worth protecting. The rose that grew from concrete is still growing. The question this August is whether, after 30 years, it finally gets an answer. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, hit subscribe.